Good afternoon. Welcome to Four Things You Need to Know this afternoon. It's Friday, August 8th, 2025. The week winds down, but the headlines don't. We've got four major developments to unpack this afternoon. First, Germany is breaking ranks on arms exports to Israel as the humanitarian crisis in Gaza allegedly deepens. Second, the Justice Department turned its investigative eye on New York's Attorney General Letitia James. Third, the Trump administration moves towards, but has not yet finalized, a massive IPO for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And finally, a proposed $billion-plus settlement demand involving UCLA, anti-Semitism, and frozen federal funds. Four stories, one thread, the tension between power and accountability. Let's dive into them this Friday afternoon. Up first, Germany is pausing certain arms exports to Israel over the Gaza situation. It takes us from Gaza to Berlin. European Union officials say famine now threatens virtually the entire Gaza population. A review within the bloc describes Israel's siege as weaponizing starvation. That's not language tossed about lightly. That's language tossed about based on the PR campaigns of Hamas to seed fake narratives within the foreign press. Against the backdrop, Germany has announced it's going to not approve any more weapons exports that could be used in Gaza. The EU as a whole has stopped short of punitive action. There's no sanctions regime in place against Israel, no formal suspension of trade benefits. But the diplomatic pressure is mounting, particularly from countries where public opinion is shifting against the Jews. Now, let's get to what's the complicating factor here. Israel is insisting its operations are aimed at Hamas combatants, not the civilians in Gaza. Hamas actually does take the food. Germany's move is a diplomatic signal, not a battlefield change. The question is whether the signal will lead the broader EU action or simply stand as Berlin's symbolic dissent. For now, it's a reminder that even among allies, the politics of war are never simple, and humanitarian law is still a currency in international relations. This is a problem for Israel as world opinion shifts. It shouldn't, but it is. Also, note that many people on the left try to justify Hamas's October 7th, 2023 attack on Israel as a response to Israel's occupation of Gaza. But now, European countries are putting pressure on Israel because of its planned takeover of Gaza. How was Israel occupying Gaza if Israel is now considering invading Gaza? None of that makes sense at all. The logic of the arguments made versus where they are now don't. How can Israel be invading Gaza if Israel is already occupying Gaza? That's what they said. The anti-Semites would just prefer we stop asking questions based on their statements. Now to New York, where the legal tables are turning in a very public way. Letitia James, the New York Attorney General, who won a $450 million civil fraud judgment against President Trump, has herself been subpoenaed by the U.S. Department of Justice. The investigation is being handled by a federal grand jury in the Northern District of New York, outside of New York City. The subpoenas reportedly relate to two separate matters. First, her civil fraud case against Trump. Second, her litigation against the National Rifle Association. There's also a separate Department of Justice inquiry into alleged errors in mortgage loan paperwork filed by her office on her behalf, something her lawyers say amounts to nothing more than an honest clerical mistake. Letitia James calls the subpoenas an abuse of the justice system, politically motivated retaliation. President Trump's allies see it as a long overdue scrutiny of a prosecutor they argue wielded the office to political ends. Here's the reality. It is rare for a sitting state attorney general to be subpoenaed by federal prosecutors over high-profile cases. It does raise questions about the role between the federal and state government here, but also I have little sympathy for Letitia James, who absolutely campaigned on using her office to target Donald Trump. This may be payback, but you can't say you didn't see it coming. President Trump's appeal in the civil fraud case is still pending, by the way. That means the political heat surrounding all of this is likely going to get hotter before it cools down. Now to the mortgage market and one of the largest potential public offerings in American history, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. The Trump administration is discussing and preparing plans for an initial public offering of the mortgage giants, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, later this year. If the offering goes forward, it could raise about $30 billion by selling 5 to 15% of stock, valued at up to $500 billion combined. It's a staggering number. For context, these companies have been under federal conservatorship since the 2008 financial crisis. The government effectively took over the companies to prevent a housing collapse. For 17 years, they've been the silent scaffolding holding America's mortgage market together. The stock market loves the news. Shares of Fannie and Freddie have jumped roughly 20% after the Wall Street Journal's exclusive reporting today. But let's be clear, it's not a done deal. The administration is aiming for this year, but the IPO could take some time. The IPO, we're not sure if it's going to be for one entity, combined, or two separate ones. It's still undecided. There are a lot of questions. For homeowners and would-be buyers, the stakes are real here. If the IPO is structured well, it could actually reduce taxpayer exposure and increase market efficiency in the housing market and help bring costs down. If it's rushed or it's poorly designed, it could spike mortgage rates. It could narrow access to credit, hitting the middle class the hardest. This is one of those financial stories that can sound abstract until you realize it's about who can buy a house, how much you can pay for the house, and whether the housing market remains stable. Finally, to the University of California, specifically UCLA, and a developing dispute over anti-Semitism allegations and frozen federal funding. So here's what happened. The Trump administration has proposed a settlement demanding more than $1 billion from the University of California system to resolve federal anti-Semitism claims tied to incidents at UCLA. They're offering restoration of hundreds of millions in frozen federal grants and the creation of a $172 million restitution fund as part of the deal. The proposal was sent as a draft, not as a signed agreement. The University of California has not accepted the terms. Negotiations are ongoing. That's a crucial distinction because some headlines make it sound like a settlement has already been reached, and it hasn't. The roots of the dispute tie in allegations that UCLA failed to adequately address anti-Semitic incidents and hostile environments for Jewish students. The administration's posture here is truly aggressive. Large financial demands tied to civil rights enforcement coupled with funding leverage. If an agreement is reached, it could become a model or a warning for how the federal government uses funding streams to enforce campus compliance on civil rights issues. But as of today, this remains a proposed settlement. It's not a done deal. 4 stories. Gaza's humanitarian crisis, the political calculations in Berlin, a state attorney general under federal subpoena, a potential seismic shift in the housing markets, and a high-stakes, still unsettled fight between Washington and one of the top public universities in the country. Different arenas, foreign policy, judicial system, finance, higher education, a common thread, the collision between principle and power, whether it's a government balancing alliances, loyalty with human rights law, a prosecutor now answering questions instead of asking them, the White House weighing the benefits and risks of mortgage restructuring in this country through an IPO, and a campus being called to account for anti-Semitism. Each case tests how institutions act when ideals meet hard leverage. That's 4 things to know this afternoon. I'm Eric Erickson. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/EW Erickson. Thanks for joining me and sorting through the noise, looking for the signal, and keeping our eyes on the principles that matter. Have a fantastic weekend, and please keep the faith.